Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the first session of the BU Wheelock Space Office webinar series, Research That Matters, Insights from Community Engaged Scholarship. My name is Cara Mataliano, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Office of Strategic Partnerships and Community Engagement, SPACE, here at BU Wheelock. This series was created to showcase the impactful research of BU Wheelock faculty and their partners from other leading research institutions. Through a series of compelling conversations, these sessions will translate cutting-edge scholarship into accessible, practical knowledge, fostering stronger connections between researchers, policymakers, and community practitioners. We're excited to kick off this series with Zach, Meghan, and Sarah as they shared their insights into their important research project. Just a few logistics. Our panelists will engage in a conversation moderated by Jessica Wong, BU's Director of Federal Relations, for around 35 to 40 minutes. Jessica will then open up the conversation and take questions from the audience. If you would like to ask a question to the panel, please send it using the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. I will be monitoring the Q&A box. Thank you, and now I will hand it off to Jessica to begin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Wong. As Kara introduced me, I'm the Director of Federal Relations, and I got involved in this work because I have some background on the Hill, and I'm really excited to learn more from the other advocacy side of things. So I will turn it over to our panelists, and we can start with Zach.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zach Rossetti. I'm an associate professor of special education in the Department of Teaching and Learning here at BU Wheelock. I'm a former special education teacher, inclusion facilitator, and am interested in this topic because one of my brothers, who's an amazing guy, huge Boston sports fan, huge sweet tooth, needed lots of support throughout his day due to his disability of cerebral palsy. And so I grew up learning about special education and his and our mother's experiences throughout that system.
And maybe we can go to Sarah next.
Hello, my name is Sarah Demissie, and I'm a self-advocacy researcher, and I got connected to this project through Meghan.
Great. And Meghan, do you want to go?
Sure. Hi, I'm a professor of special education at Vanderbilt University. My research looks at how families of kids with disabilities navigate service delivery systems. And I got interested in this area of research because, like Zach, I'm a sibling of someone with a disability. And now I also have a 10-year-old with a disability myself. And so I've always been really interested personally and professionally with family experiences.
Great. Well, thank you again for all of our panelists for joining and all the attendees. I will kick it off and say, we're really excited to learn about your recent research project, Project Civic Leads, Enhancing Civic Engagement of Culturally Linguistic Diverse Families and Students with Disabilities through Legislative Advocacy and Special Education. Can you all tell me a little bit more about the origins of this study?
Sure. I'll start with the kind of technical pieces so everyone has a sense of what we did. There were multiple studies in this project, and it actually started when Meghan received an internal grant at her institution and got to develop and pilot test the Legislative Advocacy program at urban, suburban, and rural sites. In English and Spanish. From there, we developed the initial small research grant that was funded by the Spencer Foundation because they had a strand focused on civic engagement, which matched our emphasis on legislative advocacy. The Spencer Foundation has been a leading funder of education research since the 70s. And so that first project I thought it was a 2-year project, but it was actually a 1-year project. We received the funding at the end of 2017 and did all the work basically during 2018. And it included research with 127 parents or caregivers of children with disabilities in 4 states: Illinois, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Tennessee. And with positive results from that study, we applied for a larger grant from the Spencer Foundation, which we were awarded. And so then we scaled up the parent civic engagement program in 6 new settings: Washington, D.C., Illinois, Louisiana, Maine, New Mexico, and South Carolina, with over 100 parents or caregivers. And we also decided to adapt the parent advocacy curriculum for students with disabilities who were transition aged, which means 14 through 26 years old, so that we were offering a program focused on self-advocacy. And I mentioned a few of the numbers, and we had lots of participants in these studies. And I just wanted to add also that we had many more parents and caregivers and youth who were interested and filled out surveys even, and kind of doing applied research in person. Not everybody could make it. So that was one piece I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I was wondering, Meghan, if we can just take a step back, if you could tell us more a little bit about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and sort of the history of parent and caregiver advocacy in this space.
Sure, that's a great question and really kind of critical to why we pursued this project. So prior to 1975, there was no federal special education law mandating that students with disabilities receive services in public schools, or even that public schools had to accept students with disabilities. There were actually a few states that said that schools didn't have to educate students with disabilities at all. So in 1975, Congress passed then the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. Now it's called IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that was the first federal special education law that said that schools not only have to accept students with disabilities and educate them, but they also have to provide them with services and supports. And really, the big impetus for that law was parent advocacy. It was families of kids with disabilities gathering together and pursuing a lot of litigation and advocacy with school districts to say that you should have to educate our children. And so when Congress wrote IDEA in 75, they recognized that they were going to ask schools to not only accept these children, but also to kind of go one step above and provide extra supports to them maybe. And so in trying to think through how to make sure schools would be able to do essentially a 180 than what they had been doing, what would be the best way to safeguard that, they enacted parents as required participants in the special education process. You know, the idea being that schools may have kind of conflicting interests like funding or availability of teachers or aides or supports. But parents, when they go to these meetings and try to make sure their kids are receiving appropriate services, parents' only vested interest is really their child and making sure their child gets what they need. And so that kind of made sure that parents were equal partners from the beginning, since it was codified in 75. And we just kind of rode that wave with writing this curriculum to say parents have always been agents of change. Let's try to continue to leverage that in this program.
Great. And I think one of the things, just picking up on what Zach mentioned, is that sort of the first study was just around parents and caregivers, but the second study that you all did really saw that expansion into youth advocacy. And so, Sarah, I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about why that self-advocacy piece is so important generally.
Okay, yeah, so in general, the reason why self-advocacy is important is when we advocate for ourselves. We are speaking up for what we need or believe in, which can make an impact on things we do in our everyday lives.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, I'm curious if you could speak to how youth advocacy is important for idea reauthorization.
Okay, yeah, so the reason why youth advocacy is important for IDEA reauthorization is because youths can also help make a difference when advocating for what they need or believe in to have a better school and education experience for themselves and others.
Thank you for that. And I think, Sarah, you alluded to this, but I'm curious about how you all three connected to really partner on this project.
Do you want to talk, Sarah, about how we connected, you and I?
Okay, yeah, so me and Megan had worked with each other in the past, like prior to working on this project, and how that happened and started off is when like she gave me it, like she was like doing like finding grants like to fund for me to be involved in the project. And so this funding for Spencer grant happened to have gotten accepted. And so Megan, when she told me about this project, that I was like really excited to try it out and see how things would play out. So yeah, so when I was able to get involved with the project by Megan, I was able to meet her like research team as well as meeting with Zach and his research teams to basically like get my input on how the youth like curriculum training, how that would be how helpful. Well, some things to modify because I started when I started with when they were modifying the parent civic engagement curriculum, like and trying to like be able to meet the needs of the youth with disabilities and their like learning style, level of understanding, and yeah, and how their experience so far and what they like about basically learning, having training and self-advocacy that's engaging for them.
That's helpful. And then Zach or Megan, do you want to talk about how you all connected as well?
Sure. I mean, I'll just add on to Sarah. I was lucky enough to meet Sarah while she was in the LEND program at the institution I was at. And so that was right, Sarah, how we first met. And then
Yes.
Sarah continues to work on our research team. I mean, as Zach mentioned, the first project was a year, the second project was 5 years. And so we've been working together for quite a long time. Now Sarah's on a bunch of other research projects, and she's kind of mentoring doctoral students and other graduate students in how to do different types of work. So it's just been a great experience, at least for me, Sarah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. And then Zach, we met because we were also both siblings.
Yes.
Known each other. Mm-hmm.
So we've like, I think through the sibling work and some attending professional conferences, I knew about Megan's work, and I actually, in preparation for this webinar, kind of emailed, and because I almost forgot what the first contact or impetus was for this project. And Megan reminded me that I think that I reached out and suggested doing something related to families. And then everything kind of came together with this focus on civic engagement by the funder and Megan's prior work on legislative advocacy. One thing I don't think we've mentioned explicitly is that as with other laws, they're updated over time, reauthorized, and IDEA had been reauthorized a couple of times every 5 or so years, and kind of got bumped back. In the last reauthorization, the update of the law had happened in 2004. So we were thinking that it's possibly overdue and may need some more input from parents, caregivers, and self-advocates as consumers of special education services. Like, what's going well that we want to keep? What might we want to change in some way?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that sort of feedback, and sort of educating the process or making it better, improving. One thing I wanted to sort of touch on, I think it's really wonderful that you had such organic origins for this. And I'm wondering, this was a huge undertaking. We're talking about more than 130 participants across multiple states over, a multi-year period. And so can you sort of walk us through the process of, organizing and logistically, how it all came together for you?
Well, I think, something we haven't mentioned yet, but that has been really critical to the success of the project is that we worked really closely with parent training and information systems or centers. And we loosely call those PTIs. In IDEA, they require every state to have at least one PTI. So they're federally funded centers that are primarily staffed by parents of kids with disabilities. The purpose of the PTI is to educate and empower families of kids with disabilities. So it was great in multiple ways. It was a research practice partnership. So we were working in partnership with people who are on the ground in the community, working with families. It made sure that when we were delivering the training, it was the PTI staff delivering the training and not us delivering the training. And so that also helped to ensure that it was sustainable and it was feasible. And because there's at least one PTI in every state in the country, it's scalable, right? If other PTIs wanted to use it, they could use it. It also helped to make sure that everything was impactful. So it was a partnership, really thinking through like, here are the parameters, here's what we specified in the research grant, but here are the things that can be tailored based on your knowledge and pulse on the community. And I feel like that was really integral to getting such a big sample size. And it was also really integral to tackling such a big project, is that we had connections on the ground in the communities that we were planning on working in. We weren't just outsiders traveling to New Mexico to do a training. There were people who were a known entity there, and I think that made a big difference.
Great. Before we move on, I want to give everyone a chance, but if not, was there anything, Sarah or Zach, you wanted to add on to that? If not, no worries. Let's keep it moving. So I think one of the things that might be helpful, there's, I think, 160 plus testimonial records that you all have recorded throughout, the entirety of both projects. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about what common themes you saw from the testimony that you were able to record.
I can start this one and then you can jump in. I think there were definitely diversity in responses, right? Some people wanted one thing, some people wanted something else. I think a key message across all of them is no one wanted less. No one came and said, take this out of IDEA. We don't want this. Everybody either wanted it to stay as it is, to be strengthened, to be specified, or to be added to. And so I think that's important, right? And yeah, I think it's really important in any climate to be very clear that nobody's suggesting that this should be taken away. The only suggestions that we received were ways to improve it. And that was definitely a common through thread. I don't know, Zach or Sarah, if you want to add to that.
So for the youth, the youth had like 3 options, and like one was to either write a letter to their legislator or to like do a video testimonial, or 3, a social media project. And most of them chose to do a social media project or legislative letter because it was more concrete for them to advocate for something via social media. So specific social medias be like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok that they had used like to get their testimonials across, as opposed to like video testimonials like the parents did for IDEA. But the only difference is for the youth, it was not centered on IDEA. And the one thing that I forgot to mention in the previous question, like the curriculum training for the youth, that we modified it by including like pictures, visual aids, as one of the visual aids, including video clips, word art, and using simple content to help youths better understand the information in the training. And we also included icebreaker activities and role play scenarios in the training to make it more engaging for youths to learn the skills on advocating for themselves and others.
Some of the things that the youth advocated for were extra time taking tests. They wanted teachers to recognize their independence more, accessibility in the community, riding public transportation, for example, and access to college experiences. And here in Massachusetts, we've recently passed that. And back to the parents for a bit, some of the commonalities across all of these sites and over the years have been funding of IDEA. It hasn't been fully funded, and funding tied to specific programs and an inclusive after school program for kids with and without disabilities. There was often kind of common themes around accountability by schools to kind of do what was said in the meeting or provide the services that are actually listed on the IEPs. And one big one was that there was a common theme also related to the time it takes for many families to kind of learn about all of their rights under IDEA and how to advocate and kind of thinking they missed a few years their kids could have had more appropriate services, for example. And so if there was a more proactive piece that ensured more parents were more prepared and more knowledgeable about this. And one interesting
And
comparison.
one thing that
Oh,
you mentioned, the IEPs, do you mind just breaking down what that stands for folks?
sure. It stands for Individualized Education Program. And it's the every child who receives special education services has an IEP. And it describes annual goals and services that allow the child to work on specific skills and make progress in the general ed curriculum. And that, there's collaboration and communication and advocacy that happens before and after IEP meetings, but IEP meetings are a really pivotal, high stakes piece of all of this, where, as I just described, the services and goals for the year are ideally collaboratively decided on by families and school professionals.
Great, thank you for all of that. I think really appreciate, Sarah, you mentioning that sort of difference and adaptability for youth and sort of that switch. I think that was really helpful context. So thank you. Sort of question for all of you, what are some lessons that you learned throughout the study? I think there's so much here, and I'm curious, what are things that you can share?
So for me, I learned that it is important to be mindful of other people's different learning styles, like when creating, modifying, and facilitating a curriculum training. And I also learned that it's important to consider accommodations based on their understanding levels and their learning needs, including for youth with disabilities. Like when it comes to like their IEP meetings, that just basically since their education is important, that they need to have like opportunities to practice self-advocacy, like during, so that they can be able to have the experience to say what they want and what they need, and they practice like just saying what they believe in as well, so that they can have like better quality of education and other areas in their lives.
I mean, I would say something that I learned is the importance of relationship building. We spent a year just developing the curriculum and adapting it based on the different PTI feedback, and we met with them monthly and really had to build that relationship up. And they were funded as part of the project too. And it was a really, I thought, nice partnership, but it was a partnership that required effort and thought and trust and honesty, and it really, I think, could have, if it wasn't going well, I think it could have made the project much harder. And so I think it was really useful, and it was really, I learned a lot just learning about different PTIs and different contexts and settings about how they do things.
I want to add to that, Megan, because that part was fascinating. Because IDEA is a national law, and states have their own regulations for how it's implemented, and obviously have lots of similarities and follow key principles. But as long as they're doing that, can kind of be more stringent or do things slightly different. So the state context was really interesting. And we all in it, like as part of the relationship building and conducting this type of research with such collaboration in many different ways, I think we also had to be flexible. And so as the projects went on, there were a couple of examples when, for a variety of reasons, PTIs could no longer participate. And so we, looked for others, and others jumped in kind of last minute and kind of caught up on all of the relationship building and training that had been happening. And I just think that it was a huge effort that was shared because everybody was focused on improving advocacy and collaboration so that students could have better outcomes in school.
Yeah, and as we sort of wrap up the sort of prep questions that I had prepped for you all, we're probably going to open it up for a Q&A after this one, but I'm curious, with all of this testimonial from parents and caregivers and youth sort of recorded and ready to go, what are your plans for sharing this with policymakers and with engaging with the reauthorization of IDEA whenever it should come? Curious about that.
I mean, So at the end of the training, we had all the participants record their testimonials, like Sarah said, either through social media or through just a typical recording, if they were interested. And so we have all those available on a publicly facing website that we're really proud of. And you can actually search within the website for, if you were only interested in what parents had to say in Illinois, you could search by state, you could search by language, you could search by the type of disability of their child or the age of their child. So it's nice and very flexible in that way. I know I've used the website in books that I've written. I've used it in classes that I've taught so that students can hear directly from families and self-advocates about what they think of special education. I've used it in presentations I've given. I think it makes research kind of come to life a little bit when you can hear directly from someone who's on the ground and experiencing how special education works and how it impacts them directly. And also at the end of the training, after we got their testimonials and we cleaned them up and we captioned them, we sent them back to every participant along with their legislators' contact information. And so they could go and then share it with their legislators. And we saw a big uptick in people sharing it directly with their lawmakers. And we did tell them that if we catch wind that idea is actually looking like it's going to be reauthorized, we would let them know so they can kind of go back and use that skill set and talk to their lawmakers about changes they might want to see.
A few of the PTIs, and I'm remembering maybe Maine in particular and some others, had hearings for their state laws, for the state regulations, and I think used the videos or kind of shared what they had learned with others as part of that local advocacy as well. I've used our website lots of times in class as well, and I think for college students who want to become teachers, to have the family perspective is incredibly important because one of the themes in the research and certainly from our program, our project was that that these meetings, IEP meetings and other school meetings, can tend to be adversarial and less collaborative than they were intended. And part of, I think, training the next generation of teachers to have this perspective, this sense that families want to collaborate and want everyone on the team to be focused on students is really critical and really important.
Yeah, I think that sounds so important, and I'm really glad that it's really a collaboration, hopefully is the goal between, the student, the teacher, and the parent to really make that all come together. But we had a few questions in the chat. And so one of them was, what advice would you give or offer to other researchers interested in conducting similar civic engagement work?
I think, again, working with an organization that's on the ground who's doing this kind of work, who has access to the participant sample you're interested in. Something that I wish we would have done too is really talk to a few more, what would be the right word, like policy analysts, people who work on the Hill at the federal level to have a better sense of like, is the idea reauthorization looming? When is this going to happen? Because timing is a big piece of this, right? And we had heard murmurs and there had been products coming out saying it was going to happen, but that hasn't been the case. And so I think that would have been a good decision, is to talk to a few more people who are a little bit more close to things at the federal policy level. But in general, I think more collaboration with different people who have different viewpoints is really helpful in this kind of research.
Sarah, do you have any suggestions?
I think that it's just basically finding an organization or like a university or maybe a company that you work for that you're passionate about, like with self-advocacy, and being able to work with a team who are just as passionate and as like interested in helping make advocacy like trainings work for like individuals with disabilities, especially the youth. So like given my situation, like as a person with a disability, that that was fortunate enough to work on the project where I would be like giving like input and helping modify the youth curriculum training so that way it's at their level of understanding and giving them like the skills they need to learn that I wish I had growing up like in schools. But my advice would be like, so just pretty much trying to find a group or organization that you know and trust that will be able to like guide and work with you on trying to make like self-advocacy like work, and like even if that means going to like lawmakers or policymakers together as a group, like to take to seek out information and then like make a deal of when we'll get the product and like this like the study, for example, and then be able to present that to the policymaker themselves or law or legislators, so that they can like consider making it a law if it's something that would be helpful and beneficial, like for youths who are like in school and they need training in self-advocacy, like that teachers could train students to do, kind of similar to like the civic engagement training.
I would, specific to special education or other aspects as well. I absolutely loved in the most recent project that's wrapping up now, the addition of students with disabilities, and hearing students' voices is absolutely critical. I wish we had done it before. We learned some things about how to support them and recruiting. And one thing we learned was that like 6 hours on a Saturday is not the most enticing thing for a teenager. um, and I especially recognizing that youth were advocating and were very clear about their strengths and needs and kind of speaking up for themselves, but not in their IEP meetings. I think is an important lesson we've learned, and I think anything that researchers and professors and teachers and families can do to support advocacy, self-advocacy at an early age, and in both informal, students seem to have, that under control a little more. Like, what do I need? I can advocate. It's immediate, concrete. Maybe talking about IDEA or being in an IEP meeting with a lot of other adults, there are some challenges there, but also supporting more advocacy in that formal IEP meeting too. Is, I think, a suggestion.
Yeah, I think this sounds great. And I really sort of hear everyone and sort of meeting people where they're at. And Meghan, I think to your point about connecting with lawmakers, as I'm sure people may know, oftentimes, things that are on the docket or up for consideration, things change very quickly. And so definitely hear you, but also don't kick yourself too hard, because I think that changes often enough. So I'm going to move to our next question from the audience. So they asked about if you all have any resources for people, who want to share their own stories about, helping IDEA reauthorization or IDEA reauthorization, what you might be able to point to, or if there's any guidance that you can offer to those folks who want to get more involved.
We do have, I think on our website that houses all of the testimonials, we have the whole curriculum available for free for anyone who wants to use it. And we also have the worksheet that we used that we shared with families. And it's a very simple worksheet that just uses a hook, line, and sinker approach to say, introduce yourself, tell the lawmaker what you want changed in an idea, explain why, and then kind of close it out. And so we're happy to share that. I mean, it should be available on our website, but happy to share that. And then, connecting with lawmakers and just either tweeting at them or sending it to them directly or going to their office. I mean, any kind of communication is good communication, and lawmakers genuinely want to hear from their constituents. So I would encourage you to do that.
And if it's, I don't know if that's someone in Massachusetts or, in any state, I think as Meghan said earlier, there are PTIs, parent training and information centers in each state, at least one, and other community-based family support organizations, to reach out to. PTIs in particular often have leadership cohorts that teach similar skills as well. So if someone's interested in that, I always would recommend them to such a program as well.
Great. No, and I really like the idea of, I think we're in a new age where you can really connect with anyone, and lawmakers, through social media. And it sounds like youth are particularly engaged with that piece of it. So it's nice to be able to have, such a broad audience that are open to different forms of media that are now available that didn't used to be. So it's exciting that youth were so engaged on that piece of it. So great. And curious if you have any thoughts about, what members of this audience who are tuned into this webinar or may tune in online after, can do to amplify the voices, right? I think you made it so available and so easily searchable, which is wonderful. But, what can folks do to echo those and raise those up?
For any other professors or others in kind of teaching positions related to special education, inclusion, collaboration, IEPs, etc. Feel free to go to the website and search for videos that meet your needs. I have my favorites, but I recently found, I thought I had known them all, but I recently found a couple of new favorites in there among the, 160 plus or whatever it is. So that's, that's there, and we hope people use it that way.
Great. And I know I said that I had wrapped up my line of question, but I did have one more to ask you all, which is there anything that surprised you about this whole project, right? I think you even said there's still, videos that you're finding new favorites of, but I think if there's sort of any last tidbit that you'd like to share about, what surprised you, what was really, great and you didn't really expect, if you'd like to share that.
Yes, so overall, it's just, for me, it's like being able to see the positive outcomes come out of this project. Like, for instance, youths with disabilities who not only were showing interest in learning information, about self-advocacy, but also they took the opportunity to practice the skills that they learned, and also have said that they would apply them in their own lives and how they would do that in their own way.
I'll jump in here. I don't know if we mentioned this, but at the beginning of the program with parents and with youth, we started the day with a focus group interview. We kind of split up the group into smaller, split up all the participants into smaller groups and had a set of questions that we asked them, and we intended it to be kind of an icebreaker for the day where people could meet each other and hear from others, at least in their focus group. But it was primarily a method for research data collection. And there was lots of feedback about how much families loved the focus group, learned from each other, and saw that, like, to some degree, like it was a research activity in my mind, but it was really so much more, and really kicked off the day each time so nicely, and parents could hear, oh, I also tried this and it didn't work, and I tried that, and parents would jump in, oh, you should ask for this service. I received this, or just kind of hear that they're not alone, that others are going through this too, and kind of share what worked with each other, um, was really nice. And then it actually also allowed everybody to, with that familiarity and hearing about each person's context, if you will, like, it made the rest of the day better too, because the facilitator of the training and all of us who were there, we could kind of refer back to something that was said in the focus group, and it facilitated a better discussion during the rest of the day also. And I guess I hadn't expected how beneficial all of that would be.
Great. And I think that sounds incredible. I think, Sarah, to your point about being able to equip these students with these skills that are going to benefit them for the rest of their lives, and hopefully be able to be shared sort of across their network and their group and circle, I think is wonderful. And then again, sort of Zach, to your point about like building community through these focus groups, I think is really wonderful, and being able to have that sort of connection throughout. We did have one last question that came through the Q&A. And so this was specifically about working with the Spencer Foundation, and, what challenges did you have? How did they support the work? And what sort of lessons, do you have for applying for other Spencer grants?
I don't know that there were any challenges, really. Were there?
No,
Uh, they were
they've been
very
great to
supportive.
work with. Yeah, I mean, I think we felt very fortunate to get funding. It's a very
Yes.
competitive, um, you know, funder. And so we
Yeah.
just felt like we just happened to hit on something that they were interested in, got really lucky in that way, but didn't have any challenges working with them or them supporting the work. They've been lovely to work with. So I guess our lesson is, you know, if you have something they might be interested in, you should apply there, because they're just a really great supportive foundation.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, if anyone kind of was thinking about the years of our project, we started kind of, or had applied pre-COVID and kind of George Floyd, and um, the everything was kind of bumped a little bit during that time, and because and Spencer, the one very clear thing that I remember is that they asked if we could still do our project if it were delayed a little bit due to COVID, and they requested or kind of changed their guidelines to be more explicit about projects that they fund addressing racial inequities in particular. And so I think for anyone interested in doing that kind of work, Spencer, highly competitive, as Meghan said, but is a place for you. Or if you're thinking about applying to Spencer, know that that's still a very clear kind of through line in the work that they fund.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like it was really a wonderful experience, and obviously a testament to your all's work, because you were renewed, for a second grant with them, which is lovely. And so I think we're coming, wrapping up. And so I just wanted to, again, thank you all for taking the time to participate in this webinar. And then, of course, all of our attendees who submitted some really great Q&A, to have this be a really productive and engaging conversation. So thank you, everyone.